Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Teacher Talks episode here at Lit Happens. Today's focus is looking at reflective writing. We want to look at mastery for the HSC and looking at how we turn the process of reflective writing into those really strong Band 6 compositional statements. As always, joining me, my co-host, Adriel. Adriel, how are you? End of term as we're recording this. Second last week. How are you feeling?
Good. It's exciting. We're already halfway through the year, which is always an exciting time. It's a busy period for all teachers alike. I mean, when isn't a time of the year a busy period when we reflect on these sorts of things?
But mid-year is particularly tough, I think, huh?
Yeah,
Because you've
especially
got
with those
assessments, reports, parent teachers will come up. People either having trials or prepping for trials.
Yeah. It's a lot. It's a lot going on at the moment, but again, you get through it, and we do have a little bit of a break to look forward to, which is always going to be nice. In the break, I guess if you are a senior teacher, which you probably are if you're listening, we are going to be preparing our kids as best as possible for their trials. So that's going to be a little bit of an add-on, but apart from that, it's good. And the winter's been very, very lovely in Sydney, apart from, I guess, this morning we were feeling a little bit of a chill. But again, can't complain. It's been great. It's been fantastic. And we're going to have a little bit of wonderful time talking about reflective writing, which is it's a small part of the HSC, but it can garner a lot of marks and make the difference between that band 4 to 5 or that band 5 to 6 for our students. So yeah, it'll be fun. It'll be good talking about these sorts of things. I'm excited for the holiday as well. So if we wrap up quickly, it's because we're on the downhill run towards our mid-year break.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I like that. Like you said, it's a small portion of the exam, but can also be quite pivotal to that Mod C section. So let's get into it then. So we've got 2 questions for our Teacher Talks today, Adriel. As always, we've got the student question, the teacher question. We'll start from the perspective of students. So students might be asking here, I don't know what to say in my reflection. I don't know how to link that to my piece. It feels like a bit generic, a bit forced. What do I do here? And I think this is a really, really good question because students tend to start off using reflective writing as a bit of a checklist, and then in the drafting process, realizing that there's a little bit more that has to be done here, right? What are your initial thoughts on that student question?
Yeah, I think the big part of this is going to be the fact that you're looking and reflecting on your piece. And when we say reflection, it's not a summary, it's more of an analysis. So a lot of that sort of analytical work we've done with our essay writing in previous sort of units will definitely come into play here, because you're not analyzing the practices of the author whom you're studying in terms of the prescribed text. You're actually analyzing your own work, and you are the author now. So I think that's where students can often get confused. And, we often say as teachers, we don't want retell, we don't want summary, especially when it comes to analyzing or the critical evaluation of the prescribed texts. And similarly, that same piece of advice is probably to be taken on board here for us as students. You are analyzing, you're the author now, and you're analyzing your own work. I think that's very important, because the main idea here is that reflective writing is actually an honest sort of analysis of your decisions that you make as the author of whatever piece that you've developed. Because we are speaking about reflective writing mostly in regards to our Module C unit, and if you're in the 11, probably the reading to write unit, or if you're in the extension unit, we are also looking at the reflective component. But it's all about that honest analysis of your decisions that you've made in that craft of writing. I think that's very important. So in making that honest sort of reflection, you're always considering the language of the stimulus, the rubric, and you're demonstrating sort of a little bit of how your writing has grown. Like, what were the reasons? Why did that work? Why didn't that work? I think also the big thing is, for this, there is going to be a lot to say. So instead of students asking this question, I don't know what to say in my reflection, it's going to be like, well, I don't know what to keep in my reflection because there's too much to reflect on. And that then becomes the make or break part for our higher end students, where it's like, well, I want to talk about every single thing that I've done, but what is what is it that the marker's going to want? And that's something where we would have to be a little bit more refined with, and we'll speak a little bit about that a bit later on. But yeah, look, in order to avoid that question of I don't know what to say, well, what are your crafting ideas, your reflections? And again, your reflections probably going to be no longer than 500 to 600 words.
Mm.
Generally, depending on the mark structure of the HSC exam, which we can probably just quickly just mention a little bit, you would either get like a 5 mark reflection question as part of a Mod C HSC, a 10 mark reflection for advanced. That's what I see in these. And then if you're in the advanced, sorry, in the standard cohort, you're probably looking at like that 8 marker or the 5 marker. So depending on the mark structure, you allocate whatever time it may be within that 40-minute time work or time frame, and that should dictate how much you should be writing. So obviously, the more time you have, the more marks you have. You should be writing a little bit more. It sort of becomes like a mini essay in a way, but
Mm.
instead of having like that very objective language, you're using subjective language. I have used this to craft this or this technique to craft this idea in order to reflect a certain concept or an idea. And then those are like those basic sort of lead-ins that students will probably generally have. And by and behold, again, the big sort of thing that I probably should have mentioned right at the beginning is the reason that most of us don't know what to say is because when we're drafting, we're not really drafting. We just write one thing and that's all
Yes.
it is. I know a
Yep.
lot of students are now going through assessments. I know my students as well, where we are actually assessing them on the process, so the portfolio type of process, which is a fantastic skill in developing these reflective sort of points, which will then help you to build your reflection. But yeah, that's a basic sort of start to,
Mhm.
I don't know what to say. I don't know how to link my pieces, generic or false. It's like, well, start to brainstorm. Well, why did you use this? Why have I put this metaphor in or this motif in, or why have I used a certain structure? What is the purpose of me using this form for my creative piece? Or what is the intertextuality within my piece and what value does it add? Like these are the
Yeah.
different types of questions you want to be asking yourself as a student. And already in
Mhm.
answering those 4 or 5 questions that I've just sort of mentioned or thrown out here, you probably have enough there to develop a 300 to 400 word reflection right off the bat. So yeah, it's not about not being able to write. It's about, well, how do we craft it down to what is important, and then
Yeah.
what makes my writing feel less like a summary or a retell of my processes rather than an analysis, which is what the markers are after. Yeah,
Yeah, that's so true. I find the common trap is they'll just kind of sum up what they've talked about in their story rather than analyzing their crafting
mm,
choices. And I think that that often happens when the student just writes something for the sake of writing, but they're not
yeah,
mindful of what they're trying to do or achieve. So I think that's the good way of putting it is like you said, asking yourselves those questions, and then whatever your response is to that question, that's kind of what you write down in your reflection. So I
yeah,
always say to, a student who wants that feedback is, well, what is the point of your piece? What is your intent? What is the
mm,
message that you're trying to reflect in your story? What you want your reader to get out of it? And then once you've worked that out nice and clearly, that will guide then, well, what
yeah,
authorial choices did I make? Yeah, what, and
yeah,
sometimes another way that to break it down is also to look at like what big structural techniques you might have used.
mm,
So as a
mm,
student, what was your structure? Did you go chronological for purpose? So you might have done that very deliberately, and you can engage in explaining that choice to
yeah,
the reader or the teacher. You might have used circular structure. You might have used that nonlinear and incorporated flashbacks. What was the purpose and role of these flashbacks? Did you use motif, extended metaphor?
yeah,
Those big techniques. And then I think the thing is students find it weird having to quote their own story.
yeah, yeah,
And I'm like, well, you got to treat it a bit like almost a bit like a short answer in a way. But instead of a short answer where you're looking at a piece from somebody you don't know, it's your own piece. And the
mm,
last thing I just want to say for students before we move on to, our thoughts with the teacher stuff is you want to sort of remember that the reflection is very powerful because you actually get to explain
yeah,
why you wrote what you wrote. You know how sometimes if you just write the narrative, you're sort of relying a little bit on the reader being able to interpret everything that you've put in there. And the beauty sometimes of the reflection is you're not leaving it up to them to make that determination. You are guiding them to see the story how you want them to see it with your intent. And so it can be really, I think that's why good reflection pieces, they really help the creative stand out. Wouldn't you agree that they like work hand in that way? Like you could have really good creative, but if you're not helping your marker see where it shines, that might be the difference between a B plus and like an A range, you know?
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And remember, they're not read mutually independent of each other. There's no exclusive sort of parts there. They're going to be a part A and a part B. So one is going to lead into the other, meaning that the choices that are being made in your part A, which will often be your main piece, either discursive, reflective, informative, persuasive, whatever it may be, your part B then becomes, as you mentioned, your opportunity, I guess, to look at like the intentional craft. So remember, like markers, I would say like markers want to look at like your evidence of the intentional craft. It's not just that summary of the writing process. It's very important for us to understand that it's not just a summative approach, a surface level approach for students. It's why did you intentionally, and then again, instead of looking at the what did you use? I think we go back to those basic principles that we had in primary school. It's like the who, what, when, where, why, how questions. We are focusing more on the higher order level there, which is instead of the what's, the identify type things, which students can often do. They can identify what they've used in the construction of their own piece. But it's like, well, you've identified it, but why have you used them and how have you used them intentionally to achieve your purpose? And it's good that you've mentioned this idea of the purpose, because generally in analysis, if you don't know what your purpose is, you don't know what you're analyzing it or evaluating it towards. You're not putting it up against something. So I think that's very, very important for students to actually look at, this idea of intentional craft. And then again, part B, that reflective process, gives you that opportunity or affords you that opportunity to really explain why you did certain things in part A, and it'll build the picture for your marker, thus giving you a greater opportunity to gain marks. And you're probably hearing me say this, it's a greater opportunity. Remember, it's about planting that seed in the mind of the marker. Okay, cool. Like they've actually achieved this. They've done this well. They've achieved what they set out to in terms of the starting of their writing process. So, yeah, some very important sort of things there for students to take on board. But again, if we leave them with a few things here, it's not the fact that you don't have enough to write. It's just we get stuck with, well, what do I write? So the what then becomes, well, what are the techniques and all these sorts of things, which you guys can identify, but then the bulk of your analysis or your reflection comes from the hows, answering the hows and the whys. The hows and the whys are probably your big questions, like how has this been achieved? How have you used certain techniques to achieve your purpose? And why is that important? Why? Like, what did you want the reader to have? What sort of image? What sort of thought? What did you want them to think about? And then when you can really bring that to life in your reflection, it goes a long way in helping your writing when it comes to that reflective form.
Yeah. Coming back to that didactic intent will encourage them to keep going back to the why. So then before we move into the teacher question, do you think that students should be writing the reflection statement while they're drafting, or once they've kind of completed their narrative and they're happy with it? What are your thoughts there?
This is an easy one. Like, do it whilst you're drafting, because you're building points. Make a note. Have like a separate notepad or a page where you're just popping notes. Okay, cool. This is why I've done this. Have little dot points. You don't need to form the whole reflection at that point, but just give yourself little prompts. Give yourself little ideas so that when it does come back to writing at the end of it, like, okay, cool. This is why I've used this at this point. Now, remember, the reflection process is about reflecting on the whole process. It's not just reflecting on one point when you've finished your response. It's about, okay, this is the construction. This is why this was intended. And this doesn't work initially, but, through these little adjustments, now it's starting to form and develop into the piece that I set out to develop afterwards. So yeah, I think 100% that stronger reflections will generally be a process of intentional thought throughout, not just something that you do as a one and done thing towards the end. So you really should be working on it throughout the entirety of your writing process.
Yeah, I agree completely. I love that tip of, even if you're collating that list of what you're potentially going to put in the reflection, and then it's just a matter of putting that into kind of paragraphs and in your 500-600 words. That's awesome. All right, let's move now on to the teacher perspective. Yeah, so this is good as well if you're a student. You might want to keep listening, because you can see how your teachers might be either encouraging you to write reflectively here, or what they might be looking for when they eventually mark your reflections. So from that teacher perspective, the question is, how do I teach reflective writing so that students produce genuine and sophisticated compositional statements, rather than it seeming like a last minute add on or just tacked on with their story? And I think that's a very important distinction, because teachers very, very easily can see whether it's been a thoughtful reflection and whether you've just spent 30 minutes just tacking some things together at the end to attempt a reflection. So what are your kind of initial thoughts with this question here, Adriel?
I think initial thoughts will probably work more around this idea that students improve when reflection is taught, as I guess that integral part of the writing process. It's not just that tack on, it's part of the reflective process. So some practical, I guess, thoughts for our teachers today is model and scaffold early in the process. Again, it's a process. It's not just this one-off event. Process is a series of events, isn't it? And when we're teaching this process of reflective writing, again, it needs to be taught intentionally at the beginning. So let's say, for example, most of us are going to be assessment focused. We've often spoken about this in our little talks here, where we build our units and our programs off of, well, what is the assessment? And then we'll backward map it. Well, if we already understand at the beginning of a 2-week period or a 4-week period, depending on what your school's assessment schedule looks like, we're looking at, okay, what are the different steps that I want to introduce to my students in allowing them to achieve that final piece of writing towards the end? That goal, what is that final draft or that first draft, which we're probably going to be considering, sorry, not first draft, the final draft that they end up with at the end. So again, model and scaffold nice and early in your first maybe opening weeks or opening few lessons, when you are looking at sharing exemplars, maybe using those sentence starter templates that we often do have as well. So we're providing a few as part of our Teachers Pay Teachers, but these are going to be like subject specific as well. So we've got a few generic ones. If you want to have a look, jump online, support us as well in that regard. But again, that's just out there. Process journals and mini reflections are very, very important as well. Now, I sort of alluded to this before, where some of the assessments that we, at my current sort of place of employment, are starting to introduce in our assessment tasks are, and sort of just having a final reflective piece based on a piece of writing they produce. We're getting them to actually reflect and annotate on their processes, and then submitting that process journal as well. So having the students being able to reflect throughout the process, rather than, I guess, just a final sort of afterthought, as we're trying to teach against here. This really does help, that process journal, because it's maybe in week 1 of your assessment, you need to look at X, Y, and Z. In week 2, this is what we've moved towards. Week 3. Now, obviously, we need to make sure that it's going to fit within the time frames. Like, students are time poor, teachers are time poor. But again, it's not hard. Like, honestly, it'd probably save the student more time. Like, students look at this as more work. Even teachers might look at this as more work. But in the long run, it's going to save a lot of time, because your students not only develop confidence in knowing what they've written and why they've written it, but come the HSC examination later on down the track, what you're going to be thinking or considering here is the fact that, okay, now I've got a greater confidence because I know what I'm writing, and this reflection then becomes purposeful. It's that skill that we've developed. It's not just about the marks on the page. And when students have a strong understanding of that skill, it's going to show when it comes to their writing at the end of the day. And it's going to be far better than just that mark on the page, because it'll help them with life writing as well later on. So I think that's definitely one of those things. Everything's a process. Everything's a
Yeah.
process. So build the habit. Build the habit with those short reflections, maybe after each draft, after each construction phase. Get them to maybe give them a few focus questions. Well, reflect. This is your one how question. This is your one why question for that specific thing that you've built, and get them to
Mm.
jot down a few notes. How
Yeah,
have I
no,
used this,
that's
and
good.
what? Yeah, and why is it important? But yeah, so
Mm.
there's a few big things that I would suggest for our teachers in order to guide.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think the more that it's part of that process, the more genuine they are in their response, and therefore their voice really comes through
yeah,
in the reflection. It stops being that robotic, technique one, example one, and it starts to be more of them engaging. Because I know that
yeah,
sometimes in the reflections as well, you'll see students where they will comment on even changes that they might have made, or
yeah.
parts that they were particularly proud of, or, reflect a little bit on how something was a little bit difficult initially to
Mm,
integrate. And that really makes them stand out in terms of the composition. But sometimes I see the mistake students make is they do one or the other and not both. Like
yeah,
if the entire thing is just, I did this and I thought this was good and I thought that was
yeah,
bad, you might be missing that,
yeah,
real breakdown of analysis. And if you're just analyzing, you're missing that core component of crafting, which is about students actually reflecting about their own personal
yeah,
style and their challenges and their achievements. And if I could give a tip as well,
yeah.
something that might work really well for visual learners is,
Mm,
when you are initially, going through that creative writing, have a really strong sample of a creative with a reflection that naturally match and go together,
yeah,
and look at them together. So when the students are looking at that narrative and you're trying to, use that as an example of, like this, here's a line that really reflects what
mm,
their intent is, and here's some of the big techniques, and then see how they're demonstrated back and forth between the reflection and the creative, because it will stop them as seeing those pieces as completely different pieces rather than being very
yeah,
integrated. Yeah. And I find
yeah.
even if you get the highlighter or you use different colors, in that reflection statement,
Mm,
where
mm,
is the purpose statement? Where is the link to a module C text? Identify 3-4 techniques that they've used. Where is their example? Where have they kind of analyzed the how? And then once I
yeah,
think they get the visual, and it's very good for teachers as well. I know, like when we first started teaching module
mm.
C craft, from when was that? 2019, I think Adriel was the.
Yeah, 2019, yeah.
I mean, we had always done a bit of reflective writing, right? Like
Yep,
collectively as teachers, even when I think about when we get them to do visuals with reflection statements. So those
yeah,
skills are there, but being really purposeful in it with a creative was new. It was new for me as a younger
yeah,
teacher, at that time. And I found it very helpful to look at these exemplars and see how they
mhm,
were noting down those key features, and not just that, but really trying to engage with that idea of, I'm the author, I was crafting, this was my
yeah,
craft choice, and the reason I crafted it this way was for this particular purpose or function or impact. The
mm,
more students
mm,
start using that language, the more they're going to achieve that really genuine and kind of
yeah,
strong composition, I think. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, no, no, 100%. And I think, like, I guess as we sort of come towards a little bit of an end, like, we have mentioned this, that the fact that reflection is not just summary. We keep reinforcing this. It's
Mm.
more our purpose as teachers is to teach reflection as craft analysis.
Mhm.
You're analyzing your craft. What were your intentional processes, your purposes, and you definitely provided some great practical advice there in terms of color coding and whatnot. So yeah, lots of great tools that we can use, and definitely, hopefully, where we've really instilled in our teachers and our students today that it's not just this, I did this because it was cool. It was no, I intentionally
Yeah.
used these sorts of techniques in my writing process in order to facilitate some sort of didactic purpose or authorial intent was achieved through my specific implementation of X, Y, and Z. And you can already hear in the way we're sort of framing these statements here, rather than I did this because it was cool. It sounds a lot more intentional. And you can see that
Yeah.
stands out to your marker at the HSC. So again, it's about making those good impressions. It's about starting off on the right foot. And often I will say this for Mod C, this is towards the end of your HSC paper. It's that final little cherry on top that could be
Mm-hmm.
that big difference between that band 5 and that band 6 that students are waiting for. You know, that 5
Mm-hmm.
marks. You don't have too many marks to play with to get into the 90s. So it definitely is important, and it's definitely good to finish strong, and give yourself the best opportunity to get the highest band possible if that is something that you are working towards. And if it's not about the mark, well, it's good for your critical thinking as well, because this allows you to understand your whys in life, you know, the hows and whys of why you do things in life. And then I
Mm-hmm.
think that's one of those integral parts of our English unit. It's the practical
Mm-hmm.
nature of the learning of English, which as a teacher you can throw in. You know, students will ask you, "Oh, why?" Well, you know, if they're asking the why, they're trying to engage critically with you. Well, this is going to help you with life, and when they understand that why, it makes teaching it a lot easier. So, yeah, some
Mm-hmm.
great sort of thoughts there for our
Absolutely.
students and teachers alike.
Yeah, absolutely. No, definitely. So as we sort of wrap up our teacher talk episode here then on reflective writing, we just want to leave you all with that thought, whether you're a student, navigating the actual putting it together process and the writing process, whether you're the teacher that's trying to support your students in doing that, strong reflective writing really demonstrates the true craft of writing. And as Adriel just mentioned, it's going to prepare you for success not just in your HSC for English, but in that critical and reflective thought that's really needed for those higher bands in your other subject areas and, life as well. Because if you can have that confidence of your conviction in your writing, you're going to carry that through as well. So
Mm.
it's really important, I think, highlighting that it's not just about why we're doing it for the HSC and the final kind of outcome, but
Yeah,
really how those skills that we're learning through reflective writing are going to be demonstrated, moving forward in our lives, and what wisdom we can kind of impart or strengths we can impart our students with
yeah,
on their way out, because they're definitely on the downward stretch by the time we're
yeah.
hitting mod C's. So yeah, it's very exciting. Well, thank you so much as always, guys, for listening and tuning in. As Adriel said earlier, if you'd like to support us, please engage with us on our socials. Perhaps you want to share some wins or particular challenges with reflective writing. We're always keen to hear from our avid listeners, and we've also got the Teachers Pay Teachers Pay Teachers page if you want to support us with some of our resources. Adriel, anything else before we bid them adieu?
No, wonderful. Just enjoy your break. If you are a teacher
Mm,
in New South Wales, where we're recording from, enjoy your
mm,
mid-year break. Well deserved.
mm.
And remember to take some intentional time off to reset or recharge the batteries, reset your
Yeah,
mind
yeah.
before heading back into the craziness of the second part of the year. And if you are anywhere else in the world or in our states across this wonderful country here, just have a great week.